Hey everyone, Pete Calandra here. Today's video is just going to be a little bit of a remembrance and a little bit of a discussion about music industry and things that used to be that no longer are. So Chuck Mangione passed away last week in 82, I believe he was, years young. And he and his brother Gap had a more traditional jazz ensemble in the 1960s, and he was based out of Rochester, New York, went to the Eastman School of Music, and then they sort of parted ways, not in an antagonistic way, but just Gap wanted to stay upstate. He ended up teaching in Syracuse, and Chuck came down to New York City. And my first experience with hearing his music was in a high school jazz music history course. Yes, we had jazz history classes back in the mid-1970s. And the history teacher was also a great jazz drummer. His name was Glenn Prebeck. He taught out at Northport High School on Long Island. And he brought in, at some point during the semester, he brought in this album which had the song Land of Make Believe, which was sung by Esther Satterfield. It was a piece that Chuck had written, very melodic. There's sort of like a samba bass line, pedal point, and there's a bunch of chords that go over the melody. It's a beautiful song. She sings it incredibly, but it was with the Hamilton Philharmonic, and that came out in the early 70s, like 72 maybe. And, that's sort of contemporary with some of the first two Chick Corea Return to Forever albums, Return to Forever and Light as a Feather, where they had this sort of Brazilian-influenced feel to the music. And I thought it was really nice. It was pretty. But generally speaking, at that time in my life, I was more into the John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Bill Evans, Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, McCoy Tyner, that kind of jazz music. And I loved blues, Muddy Waters, B.B. King. I had just a different head about music back then. But I didn't dislike it. It just wasn't my interest. Then that all changed a few years later when Feels So Good came out. And that was a huge, huge hit, which set up the rest of his life. The album went double platinum, and it's been licensed in commercials. It's been in movies, on television shows. It's the kind of song that you could almost retire on. There's so many royalties from licensing and performance income. So what I want to talk about is, a life well lived, great musician. I learned to respect and admire the accomplishment of that song as I've gotten older, and I've tried to do the same thing with instrumental music, make instrumental music that's well conceived, well executed, played by great musicians, because that song has some great musicians on it. If you've watched Norm Rare Guitars channels, you'll see Grant Geisman, the guitar player who takes a burning solo on Feel So Good, come in and play some guitar there. The guy's a fantastic musician. But I want to use that to pivot onto something else I'd like to talk about if anybody's interested. That when I was a child, there were a significant number of instrumental songs that were hits, right? And I'll just name a few. Telstar, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Green Onions, Grazing in the Grass, Classical Gas. In the 1970s, we had Frankenstein by Edgar Winter. We had Hocus Pocus by Focus, or whatever the name of their song was. And then Feels So Good was maybe the biggest hit out of them all. And it's really interesting because it was sort of the last time. Well, there's one exception we'll talk about in a second in the 1980s, but it was kind of like the last time that a jazz-influenced song was a big hit, right? Because if I think about and also as a standalone piece of music, right? Because there were, I can think of several hits in the 1980s that were instrumental. Chariots of Fire, Beverly Hills Cop, Hill Street Blues with the great Larry Carlton on it. But those were all attached to either popular television or hit movies. Herbie Hancock, one of the greatest musicians that ever walked on this planet, he had a hit with Rocket, but I looked it up. It wasn't as successful financially and ubiquitous as Feels So Good, but it had other cultural importance, fusing of hip hop and jazz that resonated far beyond its release period. But the point being that today there are no hit instrumental songs, right? That stopped. I don't remember any from the 1990s. If anybody can think of any, please, leave it in the comment section down below. But this is something that I think about often. I write instrumental music. There was a period of time in the 1980s where I worked with a couple of singers and we worked on vocal songs. I wrote some vocal songs, but I ultimately found that that's not where my strength lies. Like the FIFA World Cup theme, that's for Fox Sports, that's been heard by 1.5 billion people over the past decade, right? And hopefully that'll last for, I know the Fox has the 1930 Men's World Cup, so hopefully another 5 years of that would be great. Really good shelf life. But how do you navigate those waters as a composer who writes instrumental music, right? All of the straight up jazz funk tunes, they're all catchy. I've written a lot of catchy tunes on my ambient albums, but it's sort of like there's no space for that anymore. And it just really is something that sort of, you wonder how you can get that same feeling that there was always an instrumental song, even stuff that like a theme from A Summer Place by Percy Faith or Burt Camerford, I think his name was. He had a bunch of instrumental hits. They were sort of like Muzak-y, but they were instrumental hits that were played by good musicians. Classical Gas is played by fabulous musicians, including the incredible Jim Gordon on drums. Green Onions played by the Stax rhythm section on many hit songs. And then you even have like the popcorn song with all the funny Moog stuff. It was humorous, right? But today you don't have that, and it's kind of sad. And I think that that was sort of the beginning of the end with Chuck's great hit there. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say today. If anybody has any thoughts or comments on that, and how it's severely missed, there was a guy in New York who's no longer with us, sadly, named Phil Schaap, and he was a DJ at WKCR, which is Columbia University radio station, and I believe that Columbia University was the first radio station that's broadcast in FM. And a Thelonious Monk song was the first song that they played. So they've had a long history of jazz, and every year they've got a Bach Fest. It's WKCR. It's a great station for people that like sophisticated music. But he had this Phil Schaap guy was also a historian, and he knew so much. Sometimes he rambled on a little bit too much when you wanted him to just play the songs. But he had this whole rap once where Charlie Parker was actually popular music for 6 months. It was the pop music of the time, right? And that's all instrumental music. And that's sadly no longer the case. Anyway, I've been Pete Calandra. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, get a conversation going. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff. And I'll catch you on another educational video coming up in the near future. All right, take care, everyone.